Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Kornstein from Virginia Commonwealth University, and I'm co-chair of the Congress along with Dr. Wendy Klein. So on behalf of the VCU Institute for Women's Health and the Journal of Women's Health and all of our collaborating sponsors and organizations, I just want to welcome you all to Washington and to Women's Health 2012, the 20th Annual Congress. We are thrilled to be able to present to you this special pre-Congress workshop, Women's Health Research and Clinical Practice and Interdisciplinary Approach. This workshop has been organized by the NIH Office of Research on Women's Health, which is a partner with us on the Congress. In addition to this workshop, they're also a co-sponsor of our poster session, and they'll be giving out awards for the best posters. So we're going to be having two panels of speakers this afternoon. The first panel on successful models of women's health interdisciplinary research programs will be moderated by Dr. Joan Nagel, who is Program Director for Interdisciplinary Programs at the NIH Office of Research on Women's Health. And the second panel is on strategies for NIH grant success. And that will be moderated by Dr. Janine Clayton, who is the Acting Director of the NIH Office of Research on Women's Health. So, Joan, you can introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Kornstein. Thank you, Dr. Klein. It's been a pleasure working with you all over the last 6 to 8 months to build this workshop, and I'm delighted to be here this afternoon. We have 3 exciting speakers who are experts in the area of interdisciplinary research and women's health. And first up, we have Dr. Melissa McNeil, and I'll just tell you briefly. She's a professor of medicine and obstetrics, gynecology, and reproductive sciences at the University of Pittsburgh. She serves as the chief of the section of women's health in the Department of Medicine and is the medical director of Women's Health and VA Pittsburgh, a twice named VA National Center of Excellence in Women's Health. She also serves as the associate chief for the Division of General Medicine. Her special interest as an educator has been in the development of training programs designed to develop leaders in women's health education and research. She directs the women's health track of the internal medicine residency at Pittsburgh and the VA-sponsored Women's Health Fellowship. Over 60 residents and 15 fellows have graduated from her educational programs and have gone on to successful careers in academic women's health. Dr. McNeil also serves as the program director for the NIH-sponsored Building Interdisciplinary Research Careers in Women's Health grant, which is an institutional career development award for faculty members interested in developing research careers in women's health. She's a member of both of the Society of General Internal Medicine's Task Force on Women's Health Issues and the VA Women's Health Strategic Working Group, and has been influential in national policy initiatives related to training and implementation of women's health programs. Welcome, Dr. McNeil.
Thank you, Joan. What I want to talk to you about today is this concept of what I call priming the pump. One of the things that has been most important for us in Pittsburgh, coming as an internal medicine program, is to take the concept of what women's health is and both develop it across disciplines and to try and build the passion for research at an early stage in careers. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, because I think if you look at one of the things that has made us a successful program is that we actually begin with a medical student program. We take it to our residency level. We go from our residency to our fellowship, and then finally to a faculty development program, which is the Birch, which will be talked about later. It is somewhat anxiety-provoking to be here talking to you, because if any of you who are in medical education know, we are finding out as we speak who we matched. So I will be excited after this talk to find out who our women's health residents will be next year. Okay, so what do we want to talk about today? Well, I want to talk about what I think are the necessary ingredients of what makes a women's health researcher, and particularly from someone coming from internal medicine, that is not necessarily a slam dunk. I mean, certainly when we talk about women's health issues with our OB/GYN colleagues, that feels sort of straightforward, that women's health, OB/GYN is a women's health field, and folks from OB/GYN go into women's health. But coming from other disciplines like psychiatry or internal medicine, that's not necessarily the case. And one of the things that we have spent a lot of time and energy doing is trying to define what is women's health. That it's not just diseases of the reproductive organ systems. That women's health as a concept refers to diseases that are unique to women, of which most of the reproductive diseases fall into that category. Every now and then breast cancer jumps over into a man, but really, you know, diseases of the reproductive organ systems are unique to women. But there are also diseases that are more common in women, such as osteoporosis, such as intimate partner violence. And these are illnesses that, or conditions that certainly would fall under the metric of women's health. And then finally, diseases that are different in women. And so those would be things like cardiovascular disease in women. And as I'm about to share with you, we actually have a very large interest in our residency population about thinking about things like inflammatory bowel disease and how that's different in women, and how some of the issues that are unique to women play out differently in those kinds of diseases. So first we have to take our internal medicine folks, and the same would be true if you were in psychiatry or any other non-sort of OB/GYN discipline, and move that forward to make folks understand what women's health is really all about. And the second is to be able to generate, create, nurture an inquiring mind that can ask interesting and important questions. And finally, to begin to bring out at a very early age the joy and passion for research. And because it really is something that, unless nurtured, will wither on the vine. So part of our agenda is to take folks early and move them forward. So I'm going to just run through a couple of things about thoughts that we have about building both our residency track and our fellowship. And we had to ask some questions as we began to build women's health curriculum. The first is, what level of training were we targeting? Preclinical medical students, clinical medical students, residents, fellows? Should we push forward for separate or integrated educational experience in women's health? For example, should we teach about women's health in our categorical residency, or should we have a separate women's health residency track? And then finally, should our experiences be elective or mandatory? You know, the elective issue is always appealing because when you run electives in these things, you always get people who are interested. And everybody likes working with folks who choose to do your elective because they're there because they chose it. But the reality of it is, and that will nurture, you know, beginning passions and interests. But what I would offer to you is that, in fact, the folks who take electives are the ones who need it the least. They're the ones who would already get there, regardless of what you did. So the goals of our educational experiences in Pittsburgh, if you go back to those questions I just asked, we sort of answered yes to all of them. Our agenda has been to introduce the concept of women's health as an overarching interdisciplinary field, often and early. And we have been very lucky that we have had, as an internal medicine program, wonderful collaborative relationships with our Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. We share teaching programs, we share mentoring programs. We have a little bit of competition in recruiting medical students into particular residencies, but for the most part, it has been very collaborative and interdisciplinary. We offer both integrated and focused experiences, so that, and I will tell you that one of the benefits of building a cadre of folks who have an interest in women's health topics, research, education, is that they also teach in non-women's health venues. So for example, when I take morning report for the residents and they present to me a young woman with an antiphospholipid antibody syndrome who clotted her whole body, and they're all excited because they figured it out and they're sending her home on Coumadin. And I say things like, what'd you tell that young woman about what her menstrual cycle is going to be like? And they look at me really confused. And then I say, well, what kind of contraception are you going to offer her? Because of course she's 18. And she's just going to go right out there and have sex. And of course, we can't put her on oral contraceptives anymore. And did you think about that? So that's the integration that happens when you build separate programs. We have focused experiences that allow, that are important for those who have an interest to encourage it and to nurture it. Accountability is critical. So when you have these kind of programs, they have to be top-notch, because what you want is you want women's health to be the sought-after program. You want people fighting to get into it. Our track in the Department of Medicine was actually, interestingly, instituted at the request of our dean in 1994 because he had a niece who wanted to do women's health through internal medicine. So we thought that was really a great sort of, confluence of circumstances. We actually have a separate match number at Pittsburgh for our women's health track. Initially, 3 spots from the categorical residency were relabeled as women's health slots. We have a separate match number, but actually we can accommodate we can expand to accommodate demand from within the program. 1 year, 12 of our 36 graduating residents are in the women's health track. So we have been very successful in making women's health appealing and generalizable and marketable. The curriculum itself, we have weekly women's health seminars, which, oh, by the way, the students come to, the residents come to, the fellows come to, and our interdisciplinary faculty come to, where we go over interesting topics that are new and timely. Last week we talked to it, the topic was the case against drospirenone because of the increased clotting. So we try to keep ourselves up to date. We try to ask the questions that don't have answers so people get excited about it. We have unique ambulatory sites where our track residents can get specialized care with our women's health generalist faculty so that you move forward understanding that women's health is part and parcel of what you do. And then we have specialized rotations that they take that augment their time, their didactic time, and their time in the clinic. They rotate through urgent gynae as a collaborative effort with our gynecologists. They have specialty blocks where they rotate through things like urogynae, reproductive health, contraception, things like that. They spend a lot of time in mental health. Certainly anybody who does any women's health knows how important mental health is. We talk about the complications of pregnancy, and they spend time in student health so they learn about adolescence. So what has made our track successful? First of all, we have buy-in from leadership. Without buy-in from leadership for any interdisciplinary program that you want, you will fail. And what I would say as a comment about getting buy-in, you don't go and you don't talk about how great it's going to be for you and your track and how it's going to be wonderful. You go and you say, have I got a deal for you? This women's health track is unique. We're not going to, no one else in the country has it. We'll be the first one. You will be so special, and we will recruit the best and the brightest to this women's health track. And then some of your program directors interested. We have dedicated faculty who see themselves as committed to the program. And most importantly, we have identified interdisciplinary partners who support us in our clinical mission, our educational mission, and our research initiatives. And they, just to list a few, oncology, cardiology, endocrine, GI. Apparently cardiology came in twice because I was really impressed by it. So that's within the Department of Medicine. Outside of medicine, we have wonderful collaborations with OB/GYN, psychiatry, adolescent medicine, just to name a few. First and foremost, we train high-quality internists. All faculty are internists first so that they can talk about sodium as well as they can contraception. We work pretty hard to avoid the feminazi label, and we work very hard to explain when we recruit, when we build the program, that in fact women's health is not a primary care field. It is a field that goes wherever you want it to go. We have close mentoring, and it provides a sense of belonging. What has made it particularly successful for our residents is that those seeking fellowships seek research opportunities, and this marriage of women's health and a research opportunity allows them to distinguish themselves from the pack. It allows for a unique identity and the ability to consider in depth the breadth of women's health in the care of their patients. It broadens the scope of what women's health research can mean and begins to establish areas of inquiry that they take forward with them to their fellowships. Here are some of the questions from our medical student program. What's the best, most satisfactory form of anesthesia for women in labor? This was from somebody heading into anesthesia. The views of medical students regarding reproductive choice. What do women domestic violence victims want from their providers? And what is the prevalence of female athlete triad syndrome in high school athletes? These women who did these, and I will say that most of our folks are women. We tell folks we're sort of like the Marines, we're looking for a few good men, you know, and we've had a couple of men graduate from our residency track, but it does tend to appeal to women. The students went into anesthesia, neurosurgery, emergency medicine, but certainly OB/GYN internal medicine, but took with them interests about how their field can be a women's health field. Our residents ask questions like, what is the impact of inflammatory bowel disease on a woman's fertility? What is the impact of inflammatory bowel disease on a woman's sexuality? So again, these are diseases that occur in men and women, but there are different issues for women that nobody thinks about. And then our residents begin this research. They go forward to their fellowship, and suddenly everybody's really interested in what they're doing. And then, because everybody's really interested in what they're doing, they think their research is great. So now we've primed the pump. Cardiac disease in women and psychosocial conditions, and how is congestive heart failure different in men and women. The benefits to our program: we recruit great individuals. Because we've had training programs along the way, we have a critical mass of individuals with similar interests, so we can do seminars and have teaching sessions. We infiltrate the rest of the training, which is probably one of our most important contributions. You get women's health whether you want it or not, so you think about those questions. And finally, it supports our fellowship. These are just some measures of success. I'm going to skip through and finish with the fellowships. The fellowships were also initiated in 1994. Our fellowship is a VA-funded fellowship. There were initially 12. There are now 8. They just had a resubmission for that. There are 8 fellowships. The fellowships tend to be internal medicine based through the VA, but not exclusively. And this year, the VA insisted that all of the fellowships, they will fund every year 1 MD and 1 allied health trainee. So that's a psychologist, that's a pharmacist, that's a PhD nurse. Each fellow, it's a 2-year fellowship with the opportunity for a 3rd year, and the goal of the fellowship is to train academic physicians. It provides a strong environment. It's interesting that the VA would be a place where women's health fellowships have flourished, but in fact the women's health program is enormously successful at the VA. At Pittsburgh, we offer educational opportunities in reproductive epidemiology, a master's in clinical science, a master's in medical education, with the content focus being women's health and the area you move to being defined by your interests. The research opportunities, again, we have built partnerships across the way at the Graduate School of Public Health, at the McGee Women's Research Institute, at the Pittsburgh Cancer Institute with an emphasis on breast and ovarian programs. We have a women's heart program. We have a women's behavior care program. We have been very lucky that as we've built our programs, Pittsburgh seems to have embraced the fact that if you put woman behind the name of an institute, it will be marketable. So that's worked for us. Components of success, dedicated funding. You have to have a way to fund your people. We've been lucky through the VA. It's included for us in the broader scope of fellowships, so we have a critical mass of fellows. We support it with a strong clinical and educational environment, and the research environment with our CTSA, with our McGee Women's Research Institute, with our Birch. We have, and we're a site for the SWAN, we're a site for the Women's Health Initiative. We have an enormous number of programs that support our fellows, which gives us many mentors, gives us a critical mass, and we have included seed money for research. Because even if you fund their salary, you have to help them move forward. This is 25% of time is clinical. Everyone gets a master's degree with research methodology. We are committed to didactic as well as hands-on training, and there is certainly a requirement for a research project. I would leave you with a couple of questions. The first is, how big is the market? How much interest is there to build more and more programs at this level? Should we separate programs or recruit from within? And I think this is true of both residencies and fellowships. Do you have a residency and say, come to my residency and you can do women's health, or do you have a women's health residency? Do you have a fellowship and say, come to my fellowship and you can concentrate in women's health, or do you do a women's health fellowship? And finally, should we define competencies for a certificate of completion for either the women's health track or the women's health fellowship? And with that,
Thank you very much, Dr. McNeil, for that very illuminating talk. I wish those fellowships were around when I was doing residency. I finished residency in 1997, and too bad. I would have liked that. I also wanted to draw your attention to the fact that Joyce Rudick, who's Director of Programs and Management at ORWH, is also in the audience. Joyce, I don't know if you want to give a little wave. And now we're going to transition on to two programs that actually Joyce helped to build, the Birch. Dr. Timothy Johnson will kick us off with that talk. Dr. Johnson is Bates Professor of the Diseases of Women and Children and Chair of Obstetrics and Gynecology at University of Michigan. Do you want me to continue reading your bio? It looks like you're ready. I'm just going to give you Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today and to kind of follow up on Missy's comments and talk about our women's health program, our research program, and the training programs that we have at the University of Michigan. And my focus is really going to be about clinical research training and the various opportunities that we have. We have a fairly complex organization. One of the interesting things about women's health programs and women's health training in the United States is if you know one program, you know one program. If you understand one program, you understand one program. So I wanted to start off a little bit just to kind of describe where we are. Our women's health program, which was a designated National Center of Excellence in Women's Health, is focused in the medical school and includes the departments of internal medicine, OBGYN, psychiatry, family medicine, pediatrics as kind of the major interest groups that are related to our women's health program. University-wide, we had an initiative on women's health, and so we have an Institute for Research on Women and Gender, and you'll hear in a moment that our Birch is actually based at the Institute for Research on Women and Gender, since a lot of the people in our Birch are social scientists, and we tend to be very interdisciplinary in terms of what we cut across. Our health system is vertically and horizontally integrated, so that we own our own hospital, we own our own medical school, we own our own insurance program. We have a single pediatric endocrinologist who's the executive vice president for medical affairs, and she basically controls all the money and makes all the decisions, which makes things a whole lot easier. Our women's health program is a very interdisciplinary, very multidisciplinary program that really is an umbrella program. It isn't really, as with most feminist programs, it's a virtual program. And it includes a variety of departments. So it includes a women's GI clinic, for example. We have 3 women's gastroenterologists who have a women's GI clinic. We have 5 women's cardiologists who have a women's cardiac clinic. We started off with 1, and now we have 11 psychiatrists who have a women's mental health clinic. We have a large pediatric and adolescent gynecology program that's multidisciplinary. And those are the clinics where the various women's health fellows rotate We have 2 pulmonologists, and there's a women's pulmonary clinic. And then we have kind of the other subspecialty clinics here that you see. So cosmetic surgery is part of our women's health program. We have a pediatric sports medicine program where we deal with a lot of issues of adolescent athletes, and many of those that we see are women and girls. We have a large incontinence program that includes both urinary incontinence and fecal incontinence. We have a bowel program that includes gastroenterologists, colorectal surgeons, and urogynecologists. So that's kind of the broad scope of kind of what we do. In terms of our training programs, I wanted to give you a little list that kind of follows up on what Missy's done so you understand. So in the Department of OBGYN, we have a residency that's a 4-year program, and we have 6 residents that are approved for the 4 years of the training. In addition to the residents in OBGYN, we also have residents in internal medicine who rotate through one of our clinics. And we also have faculty in OBGYN who staff the VA clinic. So we have an internist, Catherine Kim, who actually has her clinic in the OBGYN clinic where she sees women who've had gestational diabetes and she follows them. She's interested in lifespan epidemiology issues associated with gestational diabetes. And she actually has internal medicine residents who come and join her in her 2 clinics that we have. What's interesting about Michigan in terms of women's health is the number of fellowships that we have. So we have 4 fellowships, the traditional OBGYN fellowships, GYN oncology, maternal fetal medicine, reproductive endocrinology, and the new fellowship, which is the urogynecology group that's called female pelvic medicine and reconstructive surgery, because the urologists didn't want an OBGYN calling themselves Euro anything. So now, interestingly, we have real challenges in terms of accrediting, and Missy touched on this. We've got issues about accrediting, we've got accrediting, about credentialing, about privileging, about certifying, and so those are a whole series of issues. And we hope at this meeting to kind of begin the discussion about both accreditation but also certification and ongoing privileging and credentialing for the Women's Health Fellowships, and I think there's a resurgence of interest in those, and I'll come back and talk about that. In OBGYN, oncology, maternal fetal medicine, and reproductive endocrinology are actually now accredited by the American Board of OBGYN. Female pelvic medicine and reconstruction surgery is accredited by the ACGME. We have a minimally invasive surgery training program that's accredited by the American Association of Gynecologic Laparoscopists. So this is the laparoscopy robotic pelvic pain fellowship. We have a women's health fellowship, and it's a women's health fellowship that's anywhere from 1 to 3 years, depending on whether or not people want to do a research year and not an MPH. And it's open to OBGYNs, family physicians, pediatricians, psychiatrists, and internists. And we actually have a poster at this meeting describing in detail our women's health fellowship program that's been going on now for about 10 years. We've trained internists, we've trained gastroenterologists. This year we have 3 family physicians who are doing a women's health fellowship, and next year we have a family physician and a psychiatrist. We interviewed 3 internists, 2 psychiatrists, and 5 family physicians, and we decided we were only going to open 2 positions next year. So there's a lot of interest in internists and psychiatrists, and there's a huge interest among family physicians, because family medicine a couple of years ago decided that they would develop tracks. And so family medicine has sports medicine, palliative care medicine, geriatric medicine, and women's health as kind of potential areas for fellowship training for family physicians. And this year we have 3 family medicine physicians. All of them were snapped up in terms of jobs after their fellowship. So it's a very, very interesting area. We have a family planning fellowship, and we have a pediatric and adolescent gynecology fellowship, and a breast training program. So those are our kind of clinical fellowships, in addition to which we have a BIRCH, which is the interdisciplinary K-12 program that I'm going to talk about briefly. We have a WERHR, which is an OBGYN post-residency scientific training program, and we're one of 3 sites in the United States that have a Robert Johnson Clinical Scholars Program. And traditionally, 2 or 3 of the RWJ Clinical Scholars have been interested in issues having to do with women's health. So there's been some challenges. So I want to just briefly go over 4 areas that we decided to highlight today. One is on interdisciplinary best practices. One is on mentorship, work-life balance, lessons learned, and some institutional impact. So interdisciplinary, in terms of definitions, we have a lot of kind of disciplinary terms, and this is the way we use the terminology in Michigan. So multidisciplinary is when you get people to play in the same sandbox. Transdisciplinary is when they play with each other's toys. And interdisciplinary is when they actually take each other's toys and develop new things using the other people's toys. So this is OBGYNs using biomechanical engineering to look at stress and cons. This is internists using the language of reproductive scientists to talk about antiphospholipid antibody problems. This is OBGYNs really understanding the pathophysiology of inflammatory bowel disease in the patients that they take care of. So interdisciplinarity has been the big focus of the Birch, and it's been an extremely exciting program. Why is interdisciplinary research training important? Firstly, because interdisciplinary research benefits everybody. If you have multiple collaborators, you're actually able to kind of increase your publication load, and I think that's a real positive. There's some negatives associated with interdisciplinary work, but this is one of the positives. Team research is a challenge, but one of the benefits of team research is that you can actually publish more with your team. There have been obviously new career mechanisms that have been developed, such as the Birch and others to support interdisciplinarity in the NIH, increasingly understanding the importance of interdisciplinarity, even as the institutes become more interdisciplinary. This has been important. And now there are study section boundary teams that promote this kind of interdisciplinary research. So we're seeing activities going on there. In terms of our best practices, what we do is we have a monthly, it's actually on the first Tuesday of every month, Women's Health meeting, and we require all of our interdisciplinary fellows. So this includes our Women's Health Fellows, our Birch Fellows, our Werher Fellows, the RWJ scholars who are doing Women's Health to come together once a month, and it's an entire afternoon. It starts off with lunch, because you can always get people, especially clinicians, to come when you have lunch. It's actually at the Institute for Research on Women and Gender, which is away from the medical school. So people are far enough away that they can't be called away to clinical meetings. Their beepers actually don't even go there. It's actually a brick building. The phones and other things don't even penetrate the building. And so there's an aggregation of people who are able to spend time together and not easily be called away to the emergency room or somewhere else. This is followed by a didactic lecture on some kind of a career development topic by an established mentor, then informal presentations of ongoing research by the scholars, and there's a lot of discussion, a lot of exchange that goes on. They've taken on a central importance, and they now attract scholars from interdisciplinary training programs in nursing and from other aspects of the campus. And junior faculty members regularly come and not only discuss their research, but discuss and critique the research of the scholars. And this has been a big plus, especially with some of the rigorous programs like the RWJ Scholars and the Werher programs. Idea development is really the most important thing. I mean, the most important thing when you're doing research is to come up with an interesting idea. And the job of the senior mentors and the senior faculty are to come up with the interesting ideas, and then for the scholars to figure out the methods and apply the skills that they've learned. So idea generation is really the key to science, basically. Manuscript writing skills are also important. And one of the things that we developed early on was the importance of workshopping. One of our early Birch scholars actually had a degree in creative writing from the Iowa Writing Institute. And he said, how come we as scientists never workshop the way people who are writing poetry and novels workshop? And so we actually had people bring their research studies, bring their manuscripts to the group, and what we would give a clinician's manuscript or a clinician's rejected manuscript or someone's grant or somebody's grant and their pink sheets to somebody from a different discipline. And it was surprising how the social scientists could critique the science and how the scientists could critique the kind of the social science things with real insight because of that. One of the most important things that we do is get people to write, and the most difficult thing for me to do is get people to write. And this is actually John Delancey's paradigm. I sit down with people, and they've all got lots of things that they're writing. And John said, what you need to do is figure out how important is what you're doing, and how close are you to finishing it. And give everything a score of everything from 1 to 3. So if it's really important, give it a 3. And if it's really close to being done, give it a 3, and do those things first. But this has been extremely, I have people who come in and they're working on 35 projects, and I say, okay, let's make our 3x3 grid. And they go away and they say, okay, I've got 2 manuscripts that I need to be working on instead of 35. And this has been really helpful. Presentation skills are important. Scholars present their work in progress. Evaluation and feedback is important. And finally, having reasonable goals in terms of our R1 activities and setting these goals on a regular basis. I'm going through this very quickly, but all of us are going to leave our slides and they're going to be posted to all of you to have after this session. Minimizing teaching and protecting people from teaching load is really important. bringing together all the scholars, teaching ethics by example, as well as the didactic sessions, and being vigilant to detect misalignments in terms of mentorship and other things that are going on are all really important. Mentorship best practices, quality mentorship is important. We need to have a committed advisory committee, a committed research mentor, but people are learning to be mentors as part of their process. So while they're being mentoring, they're learning how to be better mentors, and in fact, there's a lot of peer-to-peer mentoring that goes on at our first Tuesdays. Strong research training is really important, and then general career development. We always have somebody from the scholar's own discipline on their advisory committee. So we like to have an advisory committee of 3 people. One, to pull somebody out of their discipline, and one person to keep them grounded and remind them that they're eventually going to have to get tenure in their own department. So you need somebody to pull them out and somebody to keep them kind of anchored where they want to be. A single mentor can't be all things to all people, and many mentors work best with the big picture, while others can help with protocol details, so it's really a quilt. Connections are important, and finding work-life balance is something that one often can learn from a mentor, and I think as we're dealing with Gen X and Gen Yers, talking about work-life balance and understanding work-life balance is very important. Work-life balance, this is the kind of thing that we talk about on a regular basis. I'm very concerned about generational conflict that's going to occur, not so much between the baby boomers and the Gen Xers and the Gen Yers, but we're seeing huge conflict between the Gen Xers and the Gen Yers because they're very, very different. So the people in my department who are in their 20s and the people in the department who are in their late 30s see the world in a fundamentally different way, behave in a fundamentally different way. We're seeing a lot of generational conflict going on at that level. And getting people to understand what's important in their work-life balance is important. Life, love oneself, renewal, grant to community. How to make peace with the bureaucracy is an important thing that we teach people. Most of us in academics deal with it all the time, and I've been at the same institution for 18 years. I tell people before that I was in the military, and academics is a lot better than that. I tell people, I was at Hopkins for 10 years before I was at Michigan. Michigan's a lot better than Hopkins. So, just giving people that kind of sense of coming to peace with bureaucracy is very important. But it's also important not to compromise on values, keep skills updated, and investing in personal life. So what are the lessons learned that we would like to suggest to you? First of all, you have to recruit your scholars who have a demonstrated interest in research careers. Getting somebody who's never done research, who's never written anything, and expecting them to do something is very, very problematic. You need to find students who've done undergraduate research projects as undergraduates. You've got to see students, you've got to find people who've been mentored forever in terms of being involved in research and scholarship. You've got to keep mentors who have experience in teaching, and you've got to guarantee and protect research time. That's really the basics. We specifically drew on the other successful programs, and so that network that I showed you early on with the Michigan Initiative for Women's Health, with the Institute for Research on Women and Gender, with the Birch, with the WER, with our CTSA, with our training programs, with other departments, with our VA, are all things that we've worked on before. So let me just finish with the institutional impact, because for almost 20 years now, we've had a strong women's health program. We just moved into a brand new $750 million women's hospital. We would never have had this hospital but for the academic and clinical reputation of our women's health program. The institution, the University of Michigan, would not have built this hospital if they didn't take women's health, and the various departments that are involved in women's health are worth moving into. The view from our labor and delivery rooms, every room looks out over the Arboretum. It's absolutely a spectacular building, and you're all welcome to come do it. And we would not have, I started off with this slide, but I want to end with this slide, because we would not have this complex, interesting organizational structure at the University of Michigan if we had not worked to develop it. So you need a strong structure, but what you end up with as you work on women's health is a strong structure that supports what we're talking about today. So I'm going to stop right there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. They keep getting better and better. Next up, we have Dr. Kathleen Brady, and she has a fairly lengthy bio. I'll try to just capture the highlights. Dr. Brady is a prominent leader in the substance abuse field at a national and international level. She began her research conducting basic science work in drug abuse field and received a PhD in pharmacology. She moved into clinical and translational research after finishing her residency in psychiatry in 1989. She has been continuously federally funded to conduct research since 1989. Dr. Brady is the principal investigator and director of the Southern Consortium of the National Institute for Drug Abuse Clinical Trials Network. She is also the PI and center director for one of 11 specialized centers of research on sex and gender factors affecting women's health. And the center is also known as the Women's Research Center, and it's a translational research center designed to forge connections between basic scientists and clinical investigators who are studying gender-based differences in substance use disorders. In 2005, Dr. Brady was appointed as the Assistant Dean for Clinical Research at MUSC and the Director of the MUSC the General Clinical Research Center. She has won numerous awards, including the Betty Ford Award for contributions to research on women's issues in the substance abuse area. And last year, South Carolina's Governor Jim Hodges honored Dr. Brady by recognizing her achievements through the Women of Achievement Award. Dr. Brady.
Thank you, Jen, for that kind introduction. And in many ways, I actually think what my presentation should provide some comfort to those of you who don't have these magnificent programs that we just heard about from both Pittsburgh and Michigan, totally impressive programs in the area of women's health, because what I'm going to tell you about is a little university medical school in South Carolina, which until 2002 had really no organized effort in terms of interdisciplinary research in the area of women's health. And where our programs in this area were very, very uncoordinated about 10 years ago. And now I'd say we've made some progress in that area, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Let me just see if I got this right. Oh, I guess I'm going the wrong way. Okay, and really, just to back up, these were coordinated through funded activities by the Office of Research in Women's Health. And in our first application to the Office of Research in Women's Health, 2002, which was funded in 2002 for this SCORE, the MUSC Specialized Center for Translational Research in gender-specific areas, one of the ways that we persuaded the review committee, I guess, and ORWH that they should give us this funding is by saying, hey, look at this, you guys. We are great researchers in the area of substance use, stress, and these issues are very important to women's health. We also have wonderful people that do work in aging and cardiovascular, but we're uncoordinated right now. So if you give us money, we will turn our attention towards gender-based differences in these very important areas, and we're going to go across our campus and get some of the best researchers that we can find that right now have not turned their attention towards gender-specific focus or women's health, and we're going to say, hey, come along with us and pay some attention in this area. And somehow we convinced the review committee that we could do this, and we could bring a focus and really transform this campus through this sort of funding. And so our research focus really was gender differences in substance use disorders and in the stress response. And what we did was build some translational research teams. We have basic science and investigators working with people basically that work in human laboratory studies. But our secondary aim really was to encourage the growth of gender-based research campus-wide. And, oops, I keep going the wrong way. So the first aim was to build this multidisciplinary translational program of research focused in our specific area, substance use disorders and stress. And our strategies in doing this really were linking across programs, bringing in seasoned investigators with really incredibly good track records in these areas of substance use and stress, but no track records in terms of gender-based research, and then building this critical mass of investigators. So with our 4 primary projects, each project could stand on its own as an R01, each has its unique focus, but there was a lot of interdependence across projects. That the basic science project and the clinical were really capable of lots of crosstalk, and then the two clinical projects, there was lots of crosstalk between them using the same assessment instruments, that sort of thing. The two basic science projects had lots of crosstalk. They used lots of the same animal modeling and that sort of thing. And, you know, basically we were focused on things like medication studies, gonadal hormone findings, pharmacologic stressors, impulsivity, adverse childhood experiences in both animal models of that as well as humans. And so, you know, basically this is just kind of a sample of how it worked. We really do, it is really quite an iterative process, because we believe not only in bench to bedside translation, but also bedside to bench, because there were times when we would find things in our clinical, puzzling things, in our clinical studies or our human laboratory studies, and we would say, you guys can build a much better animal model of this and really answer some of the basic science questions. Would you do that? So it really does go back and forth, I think, if you're working very closely with your colleagues. So we thought that we had built a very nice model, even though in terms of our area of focus, not everybody's interested in substance use, not everybody's interested in the stress response. But by using this model and by just modeling this kind of crosstalk between basic and clinical scientists and across clinical scientists, we felt like if we brought other people in, that we might be able to generate some interesting research and interesting crosstalk in their areas. So another specific aim was to encourage this growth of gender-based research throughout the campus. One of the ways that we did this was by starting a pilot project program. We actually went to our dean and provost and said, would you give us some money? This is what we said we were going to do. There's really not pilot project funds in this grant. Will you give us some money to basically fund throughout the campus pilot project that focus on interdisciplinary research and in the area of gender differences or women's health. And they did. They gave us we have $100,000 a year that we give out in 3 or 4 applications. So far, over the last 10 years, we've received 300 applications, funded over 60 projects, but which really have brought in all kinds of very interesting investigators. The Aging Center, we've funded a number of people in OBGYN, our oncology center, crime victims, pediatrics, advanced imaging people. And when people are funded, our 3 to 4 investigators that are funded in this area have to come during the time that they're funded to our monthly center meetings. And at the end of the year that they're there, they have to present their findings from their pilot study. And we have just had some really, really fascinating interactions and fascinating research projects that have been generated across these disciplines as a result of giving out this pilot project funding and then making these people come in the same room together and describe what's going on. We also really encourage crosstalk and cross-fertilization there, because if a pilot project comes out of our people that have worked together in this area, we are much more likely to fund that if it's something that was generated from the center meetings. And again, another specific aim was to attract and mentor young investigators and new investigators in this area of research. And in order to do that, initially what we did was just partner across a number of training programs that we already had on campus. We had a number of pretty strong research training programs, so we started by just going there and trying to coax these people over to work on our SCORE projects or to submit for pilot project funding. But then in 2006 we submitted a Birch Award, a K-12, and that was awarded in 2007. And we did our usual thing. We brought in basic science people as well as clinical science. We usually try to fund 2 or so of each of those for a 2 to 3 year period. Again, initially we were focusing just in the area of neurosciences,